It was one thing to live without jam, but the railway shutting down was a national crisis, capable of bringing down the government. Too late, they reacted in blind panic.
The Home Secretary, Winston Churchill, deployed 60,000 troops, but even he was forced to admit, we cannot keep the railways running. We are done.
There were violent clashes in Liverpool and Llanelli, with striking rail workers killed by soldiers. But it was a landmark moment in industrial relations in Britain. The railways had shown a remarkable ability to galvanise and accelerate as engines of social and political change. And the impact was felt right across the globe. The Russian revolutionary, Lenin, noted that the rail strike in Britain showed the new spirit of the British workers who had learned to fight. The rail companies were forced by the beleaguered Liberal government to negotiate. The balance of power between state and private interests in the railways had shifted once more. Events in Britain prove that the impact of railways went far beyond the movement of passengers and freight. Trains could unify a country physically, but export railways, and you also exported political influence, social change, and economic growth. As profits stopped growing on railways in Britain, private investors turned their attention to the global market in search of fresh pastures to get rich, away from state interference. One country in particular would see all aspects of life transformed by the introduction of railways from Britain. Not a colony as such, but a flourishing part of Britain's unofficial empire. Argentina was a land made for railways. Firm, with few rivers, and flat as far as the eye can see. Yet by the middle of the 19th century, no railways had been built. It was an ideal opportunity to make money. Yorkshireman George Drabble had been trading in the country since the 1840s. He knew well the rich commercial potential of the region. His plan was simple. Import into Argentina the materials to build railways, then export cheap agricultural produce to a hungry Europe. Drabble invested in the Buenos Aires Southern Railway, which would eventually cover more than 5,000 miles of grassy plains known as pampas. The tracks, engines, the carriages, even the stations were all brought out from Britain. And when finished, the Argentinian railways could start paying back on the investment from London.
It all began with grain. In 1875, Argentina was forced to import 20,000 tons of grain in order to feed itself. Over the next 20 years, as railway tracks spread out into the arable areas, into granaries like this one, Argentina found itself in a position to export 1.5 million tons of grain every year. Railways had turned Argentina into the granary of the world.
The repeal of the Corn Laws in Britain in 1846 had removed government protection for domestic cereal producers against cheap imports. Investors in Argentinian grain could now reap huge rewards on the free market. And grain wasn't the only profitable resource to be found on the pampas.
The Argentinians loved their beef as much as the British. The trouble they had more cattle than mouths to feed. Early European settlers were stunned to see perfectly good carcasses rotting out here on the pampas once they'd been skinned for their hides. The British took one look at this and thought immediately there must be a way to make money from all that meat.
Luckily for them, new advances in refrigeration technology had arrived at the perfect time to deliver the solution. George Drabble knew of the first successful export of frozen meat from New Zealand to London in 1882. Later that year, he set up the River Plate Fresh Meat Company to export frozen Argentinian meat to Europe.
This area had a tradition of exporting dried and salted meat, but this was a paradigm shift. The idea that you could send beef all the way around the world and it would arrive fresh, ready to eat, was revolutionary. George Drabble had worked out exactly what to do with all that meat on the pampas.
It was Drabble's railways that brought the cattle to his frigorifico, or freezing plant, in Campania. And his railways carried the frozen meat from there to the port of Buenos Aires for export to Britain. Soon, George Drabble's meat was being sold on British high streets. The following year, £1 million invested in Argentina's railways yielded higher returns than a similar investment anywhere else in the world.
People are always commenting today on just how little British produce there is in supermarkets, how it all seems to come from abroad. Well, that begins right here, whether it's South African apples or New Zealand lamb or the finest beef tenderloin from Argentina. Railways, with the new refrigeration technology, allows the creation of a globalized food production system. Suddenly, Argentina's West is our West. Go on.
Argentina's railway boom created a new, wealthy Anglo-Argentine community in Buenos Aires, grown rich on trade links with Britain. Wives went shopping at Harrods, and their husbands played golf at the exclusive Hurlingham Club. It was a home from home.
The Argentinians travelled on British-owned and built trains. Their businesses paid healthy returns to British investors. Their food fed the British public. They lived British lives, all without the British government going to the enormous trouble of invading and occupying. This was a perfect example of informal empire, the benefits of direct rule without its enormous costs.
Right across the country, railways opened up Argentina's economic potential through a network of lines known as the English Octopus. By 1915, Argentina had over 22,000 miles of railways. But it wasn't just the wealthy moneymakers who left their mark on Argentina. Many humble rail workers who built and ran the lines also made their home here. They were unlikely to be found playing golf at the Hurlingham Club. But they did leave their mark.
On the 20th of June 1867, two English brothers, Thomas and James Hogg, organised a football match at the Buenos Aires Cricket Club, the Whitecaps versus the Redcaps. This was not only the first football match in Argentina, it was the first in the whole of South America.
The earliest Argentinian football teams were started by British rail workers, and a national passion for the sport quickly developed. This was railways at their most transformative, unifying a society at all levels.
Railways broke the physical tyranny of distance, but they also broke the tyranny of cultural isolation. The tentacles reached into the lives of every person in the countries in which they were built. They were great at carrying wine and beef and grain, but just as importantly, and this is over 100 years before the internet, they were fantastic at carrying ideas. Railways allowed, on a global scale, the import and export of people, of knowledge, of culture.